My name is Mitch Clements, and I am a senior product design manager. During my career, I have been in multiple roles. I've been a developer, I've been a product manager, but ultimately I found my home in product design. That's where my passion resides. That's where I get the most excited. And in the recent years, I've transitioned to management, and I've just been really passionate about building design teams and empowering designers. I'm also very passionate about design vision and strategy and really utilizing that to help companies grow. And yeah, that's who I am and why I'm here.
From what I understand, your role as a product designer started at Simple Nexus, and then you that was kind of your last role, right? Because then you went to management, so you stopped being an IC. So I mean, you're still technically like you're managing designers and stuff like that. But can you kind of tell me how you got into that position at Simple Nexus? Maybe just kind of give us a little bit of a story time on how you got to that point and how you tried out so many different roles. Because I just think it's super
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely. So I joined a company called Simple Nexus, and I was employee number 17. So this was a small basement startup, literally in a basement. And I actually started as an engineer at this startup, and I was a developer for a short time. Then I realized I wanted to transition into user experience design. It was something that I was always very passionate about. And being in a small startup, you really have the opportunity to wear multiple hats. It's a lot more fluid. You can kind of take on multiple roles and hats. And so eventually I transitioned into being a UX designer or product designer. And I just kind of grew as this company grew. And we started as that small basement startup of 17 employees. But eventually we reached 50 and then 100 and then 200 and 350. And I just kind of grew and grew as the company grew. And that's where I really just had the opportunity to see a company mature and also help the design maturity grow at that company. And so as the company grew, I also kind of grew as a designer and became a senior designer and was eventually helping lead a lot of projects and initiatives, helping set the design vision and strategy for the company. And then yeah, early last year, so this would have been January 2022, we were acquired by a company called nCino. And it was an incredible exit acquisition. We were valued at $1.2 billion, which was just tremendous growth from that basement startup of 17 people. It was about a 4 year process. And with that acquisition, then my role transitioned into not just leading the design vision and strategy for the company, but now being a manager and helping other designers to grow and lead the vision and strategy for the company. And so it's really just been a story of growth in my career, of growing with this small basement startup now to this enterprise of over 1,700 employees with offices all around the world. So it's really been a fulfilling and rewarding adventure.
So take me at the beginning to the beginning. Like, how did you find that this like basement startup?
Yeah, so when I was attending my university, I went to Brigham Young University and they held career fairs, particularly for STEM. And since I was studying computer science, I was ultimately in this debate of do I want to be a software engineer or do I want to be a designer? And I remember just going before my senior year, going to this career fair because I really wanted to make sure I had a role lined up for when I graduated. And I remember telling myself going in, ever I don't want to work in a boring industry. Like I want to work in an exciting company, an exciting industry. And so I was interviewing with all of these companies. And I remember at the very end of that career fair, I was kind of exhausted, worn out. I'd been going for 3 to 4 hours of doing those 30-second elevator pitches and handing out my resume. And I was just standing there and there was this small little booth for Simple Nexus. And there were some engineers there. One of them just walked up to me and said, "Hey, what's your name?" And they saw me just kind of standing there. And I was like, "Oh, great. Simple Nexus is in the mortgage industry." That sounded like the most boring industry to work in or innovate in. But, might as well just talk with them. And they invited me to an interview. So I showed up at their small basement and got to know the team. And I was actually very impressed with the people there, with the passion and determination. It definitely was not a design led company or a glamorous company, but I saw a lot of opportunity there. And so I decided to take the risk and just join a small basement startup upon graduating. And so I actually did an internship with them the summer before I graduated. And then after graduating is when I went full time. So it was really just networking at my university, attending a career fair, putting myself out there, and being open to companies that aren't necessarily design mature or design led or that people know about, but just being open to the opportunity and taking a chance.
So, what attributes of Simple Nexus? Like you were there very early, and by the time you had an office, like a pretty nice office, and for listeners who are ignorant of the Utah tech scene, and that might be a lot, and I have listeners all over the world, and yeah, I think like the current branding for Utah is still pretty. Oh, wow, who would work there? And good, let's keep it that way because I don't want more like Californians moving here and taking our houses and stuff. Like there's this office park called Thanksgiving Point, and so this is kind of like where like the companies that have like air quotes like made it. That's where they have offices. And you said that was 4 years after that. You started in a basement.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
about 2017 when I started. We were in the basement, and then it was about 2.5 years later when, yeah, we finally moved into one of those nice big offices. We had the whole fifth floor to ourselves, beautiful view, which is a big deal for Utah companies,
Yeah.
especially for tech companies in Utah.
Yeah. So what do you think Simple Nexus did well to start from a basement where you probably, like by the time they hired you, they might have, I'm assuming they had angel investors or something like that so they could pay you. They probably weren't like generating a bunch of revenue at the time. Like what went well? Because I mean, if you're in a basement, you're seeing everything that's going on.
Yeah. Surprisingly, they were actually bootstrapped when I joined, and
Really?
they had been bootstrapped for a while. One of the most incredible things about them is they were a very profit focused company. And we're seeing now in this year of 2023 with
Before it was cool.
layoffs. Yeah.
Before it
Like
was
right
cool.
now, yeah, before it was all about growth. Like every company was just piling in the debt, taking on loans, and hiring. But Simple Nexus wasn't that way in the beginning and has never been that way. They were always about profitable growth. And so that was one thing that set them apart was it's very easy to inflate a company. It's kind of like a balloon. You just keep pumping air, but then it's gonna pop when the economy turns or something. And so that was one thing that set them apart was that. And the way they were profitable, I mean, it's a very simple formula. They just really listened to their customers, to their users, and they built for them. And there was also just an environment of autonomy and empowerment and transparency. The leadership was super transparent. They were also very conservative. We always had money for a rainy day in case things did go south. But then they also just were very transparent with how the company was doing, our financial situation, our growth, our just everything. So it was really just remarkable leadership. And that transparency creates trust. It creates empowerment where people feel like they understand what's going on and they trust the leadership, and the leadership trusts them to do what they need to do to help the company grow. And so I think just a lot of those attributes are really what set them apart as a small basement startup and what enabled them to grow in the trajectory of the company.
Yeah, I think that's pretty characteristic of the Utah business culture. I think a lot of the successful startups were intentional growth, don't be fancy, and just solve like boring problems. I mean, and this is interesting. This is actually a very interesting point. There's actually like a meme account called like Utah Boring SaaS. A lot of the
Mm,
companies here aren't trying to like start a podcast brand. Like Silicon Valley has a lot of flashy, make life more convenient type startups. Whereas
yeah.
Utah, yeah, I wonder if you feel the same way. It's like Utah has very focused business problem type startups that are really hard to
Yeah.
market.
I think it's definitely, it is a stereotype, but it's true. You'll notice a lot of companies in the Utah area, they are B2B. And so they're often solving problems for other businesses in some of just the most non-exciting industries like banking or health or mortgage or whatever. And usually no design, they usually designers go to design school and they're like, I want to work at a thing company. I want to work at everyone's creating their dog walking app or their music streaming app. Every boot camp project I see, it's always B2C. They want to solve consumer problems. They want to be this popular brand. And so many of these companies in Utah aren't that, but they are solving real problems in industries that really need good design, good user experience. They need innovation. When you look at the mortgage industry, the software and products that my users and customers are using, it is stuff that was designed in the 90s and they're still using it and it's still just as bad and slow and outdated since the 90s, 30 years later, like we're using, we have AI, we've innovated, we've solved these best practices and patterns for great user experiences. And so when you really come in here and look at these outdated industries and help modernize them, there's a huge opportunity and it can be very profitable and attractive and very exciting, even if the space doesn't sound that exciting.
So the nCino founders, they really started focusing on the profitable growth. Does that mean that like one of the founders was pretty good at sales, I'd imagine?
Yeah, definitely the leadership definitely is a very strong, typical, what you see with a lot of CEOs. They have an MBA, a sales background, a very business mindset background. But yeah, we've definitely taken a very profitable stance as an enterprise company.
Yeah, something I'm fascinated with is the idea that like, hey, maybe a lot of these companies have sold really well. I think another company that got acquired by Bill.com, Divvy, they had a really good revenue operations. The current role I'm in right now is the sales teams are fantastic, and it's a big driver as to why we're still hiring in this economy. But I've never, I guess, like, what was Design's relationship with the revenue org at nCino? I guess, I mean, I'm assuming product management as well, and you were a product manager for a little bit. So, could you
Yeah,
outline it? I'm trying to do some forensic storytelling.
yeah. There were definitely a lot of elements. It's hard to contribute it to any one source.
Yeah.
But with Simple Next, we did really care about our users and our customers. That being said, we've never been like a design-led company. We're not Apple or Spotify or
Mhm.
these glamorous companies. But we did have intense focus on our users and customers and solving actual pain points and needs that they have. And that being said, there was some short-sightedness along the way. We were incurring some technical debt. And one thing of our platform is we were listening very well to customers and users. One of the risks we were running, though, is we started introducing a lot of customization, which is kind of a double-edged sword of we're listening, we're solving their problems, but we started to hit a point where that wasn't scaling. We can't just independently create individual features or customization for every customer. And that's where us as a design team, we started to notice this trend of, okay, this customization is going to help us in the short term, but we also have to think about scalability and long term of how is this going to scale in the future. And so that's where, as a young design team of just four designers, where we really started trying to kind of refocus the company on a design-led vision of, hey, obviously we want to solve customer problems, but we can't solve every single problem. We still need to have a focus of what we are and what we aren't. And so way back then, I was the design lead over the consumer side of our platform. And just give a brief background, we make a mobile app for mortgage lenders. And these mortgage lenders can share this mobile app with their home buyers. And so then home buyers can use this app to do basically everything they need to do in the process of buying a home, like uploading documents, signing documents, filling out a loan application, making any payments. Just basically, we're trying to streamline the homeownership journey. And so I was kind of the lead over this home buyer experience. And I knew at the time our home buyer experience isn't competing with these gigantic companies like Rocket Mortgage or Better.com, who just have very strong consumer brands. And so I started to kind of take a step back and help the company come up with a vision of what could this home buyer experience be like in 4 to 5 years if we really streamline it, if we really focus on the core use cases and the needs of our users. And far too often, I see product visions that are just like statements. It's just a sentence of, we're going to be the best company. Maybe it's not exactly what they say, but it's often not inspiring enough. Because most people say, like, yeah, we're going to be the best company. And then everyone goes a million different directions. But we knew we needed focus. We knew we needed to really bring it in and focus on our core value proposition. And so I started to actually prototype this vision and create mock-ups and prototypes and examples of, here's what this experience could be like in 4 to 5 years if we pursue this direction. And so I started to evangelize these throughout the company, and it got a lot of people really excited. So I was kind of showing, here's what our app looks like today, but here's what it could be in 4 to 5 years. Here's this aspirational state that we can achieve if we focus in and just streamline the homeownership journey. And so that got a lot of people really excited and rallied behind it. And then we started to map out a strategy, and we started to build our design system towards that. And basically just leading with a vision, showing what the future could be and rallying everyone together. That was the significant role that we played as a design team to help the company focus and grow and scale. And that creating that streamlined experience, and that eventually caught nCino's attention. So we're in the mortgage industry, nCino's in the banking industry, and they knew they needed a mortgage solution to complement their banking platform. And they were just very impressed with how much customers loved us, the streamlined user experience that we were creating. And that was a major reason why they wanted to acquire us, because of our consumer front-end technology and the way we had streamlined this user journey. And so that was just kind of the role design played and our path to scalability and growth.
Wow. Yeah. I found similar success. So this is along with your day job with sprints and sprint work and smaller releases. You must have had to do this visioning on the side somehow.
Yeah, it was basically every designer, you have all these projects, all of these things that need design. One thing I was noticing though was, as I was doing just all these one-off projects or features, I realized it was hard to know what the right answer was. I kept iterating on different solutions for these one-off needs or one-off features. But the reality is, like, there is no one right solution. Like, you could come up with multiple good solutions, and it was becoming really difficult to know which solution's the right one. How do we know, like, what direction are we going? And how do all these miscellaneous features and products that we're building, like, how do they work together? How do they create a comprehensive journey? And that's where I realized, as important as the day-to-day stuff was, I couldn't effectively solve it unless I understood the high-level vision and the strategy and where we were going. And so, of course, I couldn't just give up on that work. Oh, yeah, I had to keep doing that. But I was starting to prioritize my time of, we're going to invest minimal effort in the day-to-day stuff. We'll make sure teams aren't blocked. We'll make sure we're still delivering quality work. But I can't deliver my best work unless I really understand where we're going as a company. And so I kind of just took it upon myself to, okay, let's go interview the CEO. Let's go interview all the company leadership and get their understanding. Let's go talk to customers and users and figure out not just what they need today, but what do they need in 5 years? What is the real big problem they're trying to solve that's not going to be solved by any single feature or any single release? And so it's really just kind of being that facilitator of feedback from the business's goals to the customer's goals and users' goals and rallying the company together behind that.
What that conversation look like? Because if I understood you correctly, you just said we're not going to actively like contribute to the designs. Like we're going to make sure you guys aren't blocked, right? If there's any like blockers, but design's going to take the short-term sacrifice of not actively. And I could see how this could look like. Well, if we're not shipping all, if we're not shipping all the time, how are we supposed to improve the product? This is waterfall, is what you like. I'm sure, like I've seen that reaction before. Like, what that conversation look like? Who did you talk to? How did you pitch the pre-vision for the visioning exercise?
Yeah, that's a great question because this can be so easily misinterpreted, and I want to avoid
Yeah.
that. And second, this wasn't a single conversation, this was multiple conversations. The funny thing is, in a lot of companies or startups, most people have no idea what UX design or product design do, like what their role is. And so most business leaders or developers, even product managers I've worked with, they typically view product design or UX design as just the UI creators of, hey, we have requirements, we need you to create a UI for it, and then we're going to hand it off to development. And it's often what you see in very low maturity organizations and settings. And often they don't understand why designers are saying, we need to go talk to users or do user research. Because then they're like, oh, we've done the research. The customer said they need this, and we need you to design it so we can build it. And so it kind of dawned on me like, all that the organization was really expecting from us was to just create mock ups. And that's so true as I talk to so many designers in so many organizations. Like, that's usually all people really understand from the design role is we need mock-ups, we need UI, they need to look good and be user friendly. And so I started kind of realizing like, if that's all that's really being expected, like that's just take a list of requirements, create a mock-up, and they'll be happy. Well, if that part's easy, then that suddenly frees up so much time in my schedule to go do the deep, meaningful stuff. And so there was no point where anyone didn't have what they were expecting of design. We were making sure they had the UI, they had the mock-ups that they needed, but then we were being very transparent and communicative with, hey, here's what you need. By the way, we're going to go do some deep research with borrowers and home buyers. And hey, do you want to join us? Do you want to come join these interview sessions? And so we're being as transparent as possible, inviting people to come, inviting them to join and participate. And even if they didn't join and participate, we were sharing those insights publicly of, hey, we just talked to 5 home buyers and observed this pattern or this trend. And so just being very transparent really helped in that process while still meeting the expectations that they had.
Okay, I see now. So you were fulfilling. I mean, the insight you had was, wow, the expectations for us are so low, and and you actually did like some jujitsu, right? And use that like as leverage to kind of be like, hey, they're just expecting me to attach designs to tickets. I could do that super fast. Like I could use like pretty like well established patterns, do like a quick like heuristic audit of some other like competing websites. Okay, we'll copy that in the short term, take that some design debt, and then like, that frees up your time to just you don't need permission to do your job. You're like, okay, we're going to be doing research. Do you want to come with?
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
and that's the other, if
Yeah.
you look at our job description, it describes everything I just explained. Designers are supposed to be going out and doing research, like that's in the job description. So it's not like we were doing anything
Wrong.
that
Yeah.
wasn't in the job description. But there is a lot of people just don't understand like what a designer can do. They don't understand how to maximize design. And so usually their expectation is that very low level output production
Production.
line.
Yeah.
And I also don't blame them though. Like I don't expect everyone to be an expert on what a UX designer is and what they can do. Most of them haven't had the opportunity to work with high level performing UX designers or product designers. And so I realized instead of trying to educate them on what we can do, I'm just going to go show them what we can do. I'm going to go show them the value we can bring and what it looks like when we are doing our full role as described in the job description, when we're invested in the vision and the strategy and the deep foundational research. And yeah, that was kind of how it panned out.
Yeah, so it's a show don't tell, which I found in the team I work on is how we keep getting more and more resources and more like cloud. I mean, just recently we were doing a similar exercise, like a visioning exercise, over the last like year or so, and it led to the board, like a board meeting, talking about a new initiative and saying, "Hey, could we get like the design team to look into this and provide some
Mm,
concepts?" Right?
yeah.
Because there's like this idea that if you if you just give, eventually they'll just ask you for it, right? And so if you're just not asking for permission to provide value and you're not asking for anything in return, like the natural like universal law of like reciprocity will kick in and they'll give you more
Yeah.
designers, they'll give you more resources in general. You give you money for that Dovetail subscription. I don't know, but it's the idea that like as designers, most of our competency has to do with doing and out, and I mean that for every part of our job. Like we there's usually an artifact that comes out of our work. Unlike a lot of I don't know like product management, maybe they got like PRDs or something like that, or like decks. But designers, like our value comes from the thoughtfulness of like the output of our work. If it's a service blueprint, it's or if it's I don't know like a deck, right? And so like a produce pay, like the design team's decks are amazing and we actually prepare for
Yeah.
our presentations and we try to go like as close to TED Talk as possible on the spectrum of like what a good presentation is. And it just kind of shows, it just creates like this brand around the design org that is seen as like premium and valuable. And I'm just thinking out loud.
Mm, yeah. One of those outputs that was so effective for us, what we would do is we did a lot of this research. We understood and our user's journey and journey mapped it all out. And we saw all these pain points along their journey. And so then we started doing a lot of ideation of, okay, we've journey mapped this out. We see all these pain points. What would it look like if we elevated the experience on every single one of those pain points and just created this kind of perfect user journey experience? And then we started to visualize that. We started to create concept mockups. Now, these weren't fully spec'd mockups or engineering to go build, but rather they were just kind of showing, hey, here's what our product could look like if we solved these pain points and really invested in this user journey. And I would take those concept mockups and prototypes and put them side by side with screenshots of what our product looked like today, which in a lot of areas was very outdated. There were a lot of parts that had been designed by engineers or built by development before the company had a full design team. And so that was an artifact that I would share every week in a Slack channel. Okay, look at this part of the user's journey. Here's a screenshot of what we have today, and here's a concept of what it could be like. And when everyone in the company started seeing these, like sales got super excited. They were just blown away. Like, why aren't we building that? And marketing was also getting in, like, why aren't we doing that? And it's got product management excited. Developers are getting excited. 'Cause, like, that's what everyone wants to be building and doing. And this eventually got the attention of the leadership.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break from our scheduled programming. If you're enjoying this podcast and you've gotten any value out of it so far, I have a special request for you. I'm currently writing a book on product team collaboration, and I want to get the message out there. So if you want to take a moment and hit subscribe in your podcast app, that would mean the world to me, and it would be super helpful in booking better guests, getting better content out there, and getting the message of this book out to more people. So whether you have to pause this podcast or you like multitasking while listening to it, just take a moment and hit subscribe on the show page and show your support. Again, thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
And once again, a key part was we had such incredible leadership who were humble and open and transparent. And so when they took notice of this, they started adopting it as, yeah, let's make this our product vision. Like, we are streamlining the home ownership journey. And so the whole company just kind of started to rally around these prototypes and mock-ups that we were creating. And they were very aspirational. We're talking about things that were, 3 to 5 years to finally get to, but kind of set like a North Star, a direction. Just everyone was rallied around, how do we get there? And that's when you have compelling artifacts or a compelling vision, is the whole company's just rallying around these things that design is creating, and it's changing their thinking, it's changing the decision making. And it was just a very effective persuasive piece. And naturally, because of that, like, our design maturity grew. People were no longer just expecting mock-ups from us or UI for random Jira tickets, but they were starting to see us as these connectors, these facilitators, these people that can help take problems or pain points and problems and actually create that into a cohesive solution that then development can take and break down and figure out the order of releases, or we can strategize, where should we start? What's the step one and the step two? And so, yeah, it was definitely and this was a multi-year journey. I want to iterate, like, this did not happen overnight. This wasn't just sharing one presentation or one artifact, but it was a process of repetition, and it was a journey, and we brought the whole company on that journey. And the company grew, the design team grew, we all benefited from
it. Almost is like a sales game, right? Where you need the law, I guess, of sales is that it usually takes about 7 interactions with a brand, because you have to like interact a few times, digest your interaction with them, and that kind of helps you consider what they're doing. And then that eventually sometimes around the 7th time, if they do eventually convert to your offering or your idea, they've already been thinking about it for a long time. This is like a lot of like socialization work. So
Yeah.
so since it wasn't like a big presentation and you weren't doing a big hard sell, like what do those interactions look like? What was kind of like your game plan as you're socializing these visioning mock-ups and artifacts?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really, it was involving it just daily interactions. I've seen two approaches. The one you described, where like design goes in a silo, creates this ambitious vision, and then does like the big maybe that works for some companies. What comes to mind is Apple, where they're very secretive, and then they suddenly do these big reveals. But we were Apple. Like, it's very rare for
Oh,
companies to be able to. Oh,
well,
go ahead.
oh yeah. And sorry to interrupt, but it also reminds me there was actually a front talk from a former head of design at Lyft. I don't know if you remember this.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I watched it a long time ago. I forgot when I watched it, but yeah, they did that at Lyft. They had this really cool design studio at Lyft, and they came up with this big experience vision, and they're like, this is what we're doing. And then everyone, it just fell flat because everyone just got allergic to this idea of like design just mandating everything. And then they made this really funny meme of Trump where he's talking about the wall, and it's like, hey, we built this really great design, it's the best, we're going to build this design, build this wall. It was kind of playing on
Yeah.
that like pop culture moment. It was definitely when Trump was president, so it was a while ago. But yeah, the guy was talking about that lesson where it's just like, oh, design just goes in a silo. Okay, this is the design vision, this is what we're doing, and no one feels like they were brought along, and they're finding out when it was
Yeah.
finished.
Which honestly, like, from my observation, that strategy only works if your CEO is already like a designer. And that's what you see with companies like Apple, where the founder was a designer. And so when they do these big reveals, like they're already bought in. But when you're at a company where the founder doesn't have that design background, maybe their background is in sales or marketing or development or whatever, but it's probably not going to work. And so instead, what you need to do is you need to bring the whole company on that journey and you need to involve them in that journey. And that was one thing that was so effective as I was sharing all these kind of vision concepts on a weekly basis. I was publicly sharing them with the entire company in a Slack channel that anyone could see and anyone could comment. And this made it very collaborative. People were commenting on it. Some people were calling out assumptions or challenging parts and pieces. And that's great. Yeah, we want to hear what are the holes in this. Help us identify them. Let's work together to challenge assumptions we're making in here. And also, a lot of people, like from support or customer success, they were saying, oh my goodness, like I have so many customers. We have to show this to them. And that was a really good opportunity to connect more customers to do user research with. And once again, we have to be careful. We're not telling customers we're building this, but rather, hey, this is an idea we have and we want your feedback. We want to test it. We want to get more insights and perspectives. And that was one of the really exciting things with this approach is everyone kind of was along for the journey and they were also help contributing to the vision. They're helping contribute to the research. They were helping challenge the assumptions. And so after we had done this, I was doing this actively for 9 weeks, like once a week. It was like, here's the vision for, and maybe vision's the wrong word, but here's a concept this experience could be like for this part of the app.
You'd like an internal newsletter.
Basically, yeah, it took consistency, it took repetition. The first few initial posts, most people didn't notice or comment, but it was kind of like a snowball effect where people just saw these exciting things being, it's like your newsletter, but exciting newsletter, one that people get excited to read. And it started getting attention. It started coming in the daily conversations. And just more and more people were asking, like, the conversation changed from, are we doing this? To how do we do this? And that's when you have a compelling vision and you're getting people excited and bringing them along. Because it's no longer this like what if scenario, but it's really starting to get more concrete into what's preventing us from doing this. Like, why don't we just go do this right now? And those are the crucial conversations and interactions of resources and strategy and, how do we set up the company to be able to do this?
I like that quote, and I'll just say you coined it, is that it stopped being a matter of how we're going to do this, but when are we going to do this? Is that what? Let me make sure I got that right.
Yeah, essentially, are we doing this to how are we going to do this to when are we going to do this? Those questions started to change.
They sold themselves, basically. And you're just showing, like, here's an idea, and they're like, oh, why don't we do that? That's awesome. And you're like, okay, sure. I mean, the product needs to prioritize it, but but it makes it like so that you go to like product management or like the CEO, and you're like, okay, your move.
Yeah. And honestly, I see a lot of times like designers saying, I wish I had a seat at the table. I wish I was in those prioritization meetings or strategy meetings. Essentially, we created our own table. Because
Hmm.
everyone was kind of coming to us. We created this table that excited a lot of people, and everyone wanted to be part of that table. And at the end of the day, it's like not design's table, but it's just ultimately like this is the company's table. Like we are all part of the so. And of course, when you help create that table, like obviously you have a seat there. And there were big discussions. There was kind of two approaches. Do we grab some development teams and put them on the sideline, like have them create this brand new app from the ground up and spend 2 years like reinventing our entire product? Or are we going to do this iteratively? Are we going to transform our existing product over the next 3 to 5 years to this aspirational experience? And that was a big decision. Like those are two polar opposite approaches. But as a small but fast growing company, we didn't have the luxury to just go grab a group of developers and have them work on the secret project that's going to basically replace our entire product. And we didn't have that luxury to
And
be iterative.
and that's just really bad for the culture. I mean, from what I understood, like
Mm.
Podium had a payments team, and they got to do all the cool stuff. And at Progressive Leasing, we had this mobile app team, and they just basically recreated the whole business in the mobile app. They didn't even integrate with any other services, and they just kind of did whatever they
Oh,
just did whatever they wanted. Same thing at when I worked at Family Search. It was like the Family Search app, which is like a genealogy software company I worked at starting out, and they had this mobile team, and they made their own UIs for every workflow. Like they were their own little and what like how do you feel if you're not on that team?
I have heard this so many times, and I've seen this so many times, like these innovation teams,
Hmm.
or I'm trying to think of like I've heard so many different terms like skunk work team or innovation team or whatever, and it really sends the wrong message to the rest of the company. Because yeah, to your point, then you get all these developers or designers that are like, oh, it's not my job to innovate. That's their job. I'm just here. It really just it ruins morale. It ruins camaraderie. And so I think it was really impactful to say, hey, there's no first off, this wasn't created in a silo. But second, we're not going to develop it in a silo. Like, this isn't just some secret, multi-year project. Rather, we are all part of this. This is our company vision. We are all contributors. We are all innovators. And we're all here to do this together.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we are the innovation team. Like this group.
Yeah.
And I love that too. It's like you didn't get to this point by like making this really cool vision in a silo and doing a big like reveal presentation and then like doing a hard sell at the end. So why would you just spin off some innovation team? And honestly, as I learned more about leadership, and I'm sure you've seen this as you've leaned into your leadership role, is that the job of a manager is to make sure that all of the resources are being human resources. And I know that's like a really, I don't really like the term, but it's like all your teammates are effectively utilized. Their talents are being utilized. And I feel like when you do an innovation or an R&D group, that's just lazy leadership.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's been interesting because for most of this journey, I was a senior designer, really kind of leading hands on this
Mm-hmm.
vision and strategy for the company. And it was primarily centered around one core user experience. But then when we got acquired, my role quickly transitioned into a manager role. And now instead of being the kind of hands on leader for this vision and strategy for a single user experience, it's shifted to how do I empower the rest of my design team to lead out on the vision and strategy in their parts of the product. And then, kind of as a leader, help, okay, we have this vision for the home buying experience, but we also have other core experiences in our platform, like for mortgage lenders or for real estate agents. And we need to make sure all of these visionary experiences are working together in one cohesive ecosystem. We need to make sure they're all working together and that we got the priorities straight and that the roadmaps are coordinated. And so that's really how my role has transitioned is, I'm no longer leading out the vision and strategy hands on for just one space, but I'm empowering the rest of my designers as well as product managers and developers to really think aspirational and to innovate and bring those all together.
Yeah, and know how to place your team. It's like you're a sports coach, right? You know, where in it we're I get it. We're all dorks here in this industry. So the sports metaphor might not be super applicable, but one of my favorite things to do, and I realized now I got like the surprise. I'm a designer with ADHD. I got that diagnosis earlier this year. I found out that what people with ADHD would do in school or like when they're working is they'll like watch TV or have TV playing while they're doing homework or working, and so because it helped them focus, ironically, by having a distraction, it helped them
Mm,
focus. And that's how I like do a lot of like my heads down design work because I didn't know at the time. I would just watch these all or nothing documentaries on Amazon Prime, which is they cover a lot of sports teams, but I was really interested in the Premier League ones and like the business of like soccer teams, right? And you look at
okay.
and and the coach of a soccer team is not called a coach; they're called a manager.
Mm,
And what they do is they because their job isn't. It's very different from like an American football coach, where like you're writing all the plays out, and all the football players
right,
are
right.
the American football players are like order takers. Like they don't think. You just have to, hey, this is the play we're doing, execute it, and then get yardage. In soccer,
Mm,
there's not much that the manager can do when the game's playing, and so it's about
yeah.
understanding the strengths of your team and making sure that they're like when you're practicing, and I think they call it training over there, but that they're a fit, that they're a team, they work together as a team. There's like the whole concept of like acquiring players and talent, right? And okay, like we need this guy as like our forward, or oh, this
Mm,
person could be like a good goalie, and you like understand the position. So the manager is basically their job is to place people on the team, and then at the game they're basically just watching, and maybe they'll
yeah.
substitute team members and stuff. But that's what like good management is.
No, I think that's a great analogy. And one of the, I don't know how to word this. One of the stereotypes or terminology that really bothers me is when people use the words manager and leadership interchangeably,
Mm.
where it's implying that to be a leader, you have to be a manager, you have to have direct reports. And I think, like, obviously, a manager should be a good leader, but you want, like, every designer to be a leader. And you want every player on the team to demonstrate leadership. And that is so crucial and important that because the manager, once the game starts, yeah, you can't go in there and make the plays yourself. You can't go in there and touch the ball. You're depending on the team to work together, and you're going to need strong leaders on that team that are the individual players and individual contributors. And so it's just essential that as a manager, yes, you're a leader, but you need to enable individual contributors to also be leaders, to lead out on the vision and the strategy and the hands on design. That's going to be the most effective way to scale and grow a team is when everyone can be a leader, regardless if they're a manager or not.
So I'm currently a design lead right now. I don't have any report because that's not where my strength lies, right? Like I could coach and
Yeah.
stuff, but like the intention of is that I could partner with other designers without any authority, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's designers should consider that as like a career path. Is just a principle I see. Like the higher up you go, the leverage comes from your ability to collaborate and get the best out of the people around you, or not get the best, bring out the best.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I want to emphasize, most of this conversation has been about this journey and me starting at the small basement startup of 17 employees for 4.5 years, growing to 350 employees by creating this vision and strategy, which resulted in this incredible acquisition. But for that majority of that journey, like I wasn't a manager, I
Yeah.
was a senior designer. And yet, as a senior designer, I was leading out on the vision and strategy for the company. I was creating that table. I'm not waiting for permission or assignments to go and do these things. I was just taking initiative and naturally, it wasn't with the intent of being a leader. It was just with the intent of, I want to build the best product possible. I really want to help this company be successful. And then naturally, you start to get followers. Even if they're not your direct reports, you
Yeah.
just naturally become a leader and people follow you. People listen to you. Even non designers, you have people in sales and marketing and even C-level leadership. They're looking to you to help lead out. And that's something that's really powerful. You don't need a you don't need to be a manager to do that.
I think that's the perfect definition of, oh, that person's a leader. Is a leader is someone that has people that like follow them and take them seriously. That's it. Like that's, and so people are like, oh, I'm a leader, and I'm like, I know all your direct reports. They hate you. Like you're not a leader, dude. Like it's
You're a micromanager, you're not a leader. Most
yeah,
likely in that scenario.
yeah, and a lot of but like the amazing thing is that but how do you get to leadership? I just read this book called The Motive, which just talks about all the things that most like leaders advocate in their responsibilities, and it looks under the frame of what a CEO is, right? Like the job of the CEO, but
Mm,
basically like a few of the things that they advocate, and this is what I remember, right? So it's not going to be an exhaustive list of what was in the book, but that as soon as you become a leader, the temptation is to think that, or you become a manager or like a higher level, like if you're up on the org chart, right? And you see it
yeah.
as a reward rather than a responsibility. You're like, this is a reward for all my
Mm,
hard work, so I don't have to do as much. Like I don't answer to as many people. I'm more autonomous. I'm going to do less meetings. I don't need to be in every meeting. I'm going to be a hands-off leader, right? Which is super
mm,
ironic. It's a very ironic statement. I'm going to be hands-off, and then I'll come if like something hits the fan, right?
yeah.
And then another thing is like no, the whole job of a manager, like when you're managing a team, is knowing how to run good meetings, knowing how to remind people over and over again about the same thing. And this goes into your point about the visioning exercises. In the CEO example, it's like you're the chief reminding officer. Like your job is just to propagate the same narrative because you're thinking like multiple years down the road for the company, right? And so
Yeah.
ideally, your message shouldn't change that often. Like so, you're just
Yeah.
pushing the same narrative and stuff. But that's what leadership is. But ironically, when you manage better, you become a leader because
Mm,
you have good meetings, and then also you develop a culture of good meetings by doing this. You develop a culture of like not being above repeating yourself. I think a lot of people get very senior, they feel like they shouldn't have to repeat themselves, right? They're like, I told you already, right?
yeah.
And
It is the exact opposite. If you want to provide context, clarity, and focus, then you need to be consistent. You need to keep repeating the same message. And it's going to take time. These transformations or culture shifts, they're never going to happen overnight. And so that means you're going to be repeating the same message for weeks, months, seasons, maybe even years. But it's that if you've identified the right message, the right initiative, then you just have to get that to everyone else, and it will take repetition. But through that repetition, they're going to have the clarity and transparency and context they need to make the best decisions that align with the overall vision of the company.
absolutely, and it's really unfortunate. I do want to respect your time, but that feels like its own podcast episode. Is like, how do you even find the right message? How do you know what to like hawk from your and like push?
Mm,
Right?
yeah.
That's another good one. I do feel like a little nugget in there for anyone that is curious, and you might just need to come back on the show. Is my interpretation from your journey, right? Is that how do you find that right message? You do the work, right? Like understanding the customers, you understand like their pain points and stuff, and then you've basically synthesized and distilled the key principles and opportunities and pain points based off of any kind of prioritization framework. I like Teresa Torres's framework,
Yeah.
assumption mapping to like prioritize like these are the most important things and that you repeat those. But I mean that's what I get. I mean, I guess to wrap up, like how do you I guess what's the preview of the next podcast? Oh, like how do you feel like you find that correct message?
Yeah, I think you called out a key point there about assumptions. Because as a leader or as a manager or whatever, you're going to be wrong at times. Like you're just going to be flat out have the wrong message or the wrong insight. And so you have to keep an open mind. You have to keep a lot of designers, we come in thinking design can save the world. Like if everyone just understood and did design, we'll solve everything. But in my journey of being a developer and a product manager and a designer, I've realized like design doesn't have all the answers. You need to take insights from every discipline. You need to understand where sales is coming from, where marketing's coming from, where your users, customers, and shareholders are coming from. When you really just have an open mind and you see all these different perspectives, you can start to connect them together. You can start to see these insights and patterns emerge of how can we piece this all together where everyone wins. And part of that's going to be your design thinking mindset. But if you open up, you're going to realize you need other perspectives, you need diversity, you need to just really be open to all these different perspectives. And that's what's going to create an effective solution that works for everyone. And that solution is going to be the message that resonates with everyone. I think that's my biggest thing. Don't go in with assumptions. If anything, assume you're wrong in everything and just be very open until you realize, okay, I'm very confident like this aspect is correct, or this viewpoint is correct, or this would work. I think that's how you get that message. And it's not easy. It takes time and experience and maturity, which is why you typically, that often falls on senior people, like senior designers or C-level leaders. That being said, like interns can also do this. Junior designers can also do this in different scopes and varieties. So I think that'd be my key takeaway here.
Yeah, I really like that. Where it's just be very aware of all the assumptions that you have about problem space, and then everything you do is just testing them. Right? It's like this intellectual humility. Like this is the current evidence I have. Here's my current assumptions, and have the humility to try to prove them wrong. I don't know. Good a scientist, maybe. I don't know. Like there. I guess to wrap up, I watched there's like that movie, the Theory of Everything, which is about Stephen Hawking, and he's talking to this guy about this theory that he came up with, and he got a lot of recognition for it. And the guy's like, okay, so what's next? And he's like, okay, now I'm going to try to disprove that theory. Yeah. So I developed this theory that's peer reviewed, very well established. Okay, next step, disprove it. That's my job as a scientist. I'm not saying like we're trying to be peer reviewed or anything, but I feel like that's a really great way to look at the world. And then also you don't have pressure to be right all the time. But yeah. So Mitch,
don't be afraid to admit when you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And just be able to be like, oh, assumption was wrong. Here's my new assumption.
Yeah.
And all we have are assumptions, unless we do the peer review process, which is not a thing. I think maybe there's business models being replicated, when you're the first, and then all these other business models like come in as competitors and they kind of basically copy your offering and then they're successful. Maybe that's what peer review is in business, but I don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mitch, is there any like loose ends that you want to tie before we sign off?
I think we hit on all the key points. Just a reminder to be open and a reminder that it's going to take time. This kind of stuff doesn't happen overnight. Like this was a 4.5-year journey for me, and it's still going for me now that I'm working at nCino. But it takes time, it takes repetition, but it's possible if you have the right culture and the right people.
Well, Mitch, thank you so much for coming on the show. You have a good one.
Absolutely.
Hey listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download. Is everyone gone yet? Because this next offer is for you. And this is because you listened all the way to the end of this episode. Today's episode is sponsored by Alchemy, a name you might not be familiar with yet, but one you'll definitely want to remember. I don't know about you, but most meetings are terrible. Long circular discussions, weeks with no progress. I was tired of that. Tired of good energy getting sucked out of potentially explosive creative sessions. So I finally decided to do something about it. That's why I started Alchemy. Think of Alchemy as a special ops for team collaboration. We're the ones you call for remote or on-site workshops where you need to get your product team aligned and moving without the usual drag. No more endless circles or feeling like you're herding cats. I've been there. I've been stuck in the muck of misalignment, watching the clock while creativity just fizzles out. That's not how breakthroughs happen. Alchemy workshops are built differently. Think of it as a turbo boost for your team's productivity. So here's what you do. Visit wayofproduct.com/workshops and let's start turning those meeting groans into high fives. All right. Thanks for listening to the full episode. And remember, with Alchemy, it's not just a meeting, it's a turning point. Talk to you soon.